I am Joshua, 29, and 2 weeks before Christmas. My own mother uninvited me from our family dinner because she decided I was too much of a financial embarrassment to be seen in public. Before I tell you exactly how I ended up smiling on the cover of Forbes magazine as a secret billionaire on Christmas morning, do me a quick favor and let me know where you are watching from in the comments down below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. The phone call that changed the trajectory of my entire life came on a Tuesday. It was December 10th. I remember the exact date because the Boston sky outside my office window was a miserable, heavy shade of slate gray, threatening snow but never actually delivering. I was standing in my corner office. It's a beautiful space, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, a massive mahogany desk, the quiet hum of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire operating just outside my door. I was reviewing the final quarterly projections for my company, Novice Analytics. My phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Margaret. I took a deep breath before answering. Conversations with my mother were rarely pleasant. They were usually tactical. I swiped the screen and put the phone to my ear. "Hey, Mom," I said, keeping my tone carefully neutral. "What's going on? Do you need me to bring anything specific to Greenwich for the Eve dinner?" I was thinking about picking up some of those pastries Dad likes from the North End. There was a pause on the line. It wasn't a warm pause. It was the icy, calculated silence she used right before she was about to deliver a verdict. "Joshua, we need to have a serious talk about the holidays," she said. Her voice didn't waver. It carried that polished, country club diplomatic tone she used when she was speaking to someone she considered beneath her. Not angry, not sad, just entirely detached. "Okay," I said, my grip tightening slightly on the phone. "I'm listening. Your cousin Julian is bringing his fiancée, Victoria, to Christmas Eve dinner this year," she began, her voice smoothing out into a practiced rhythm. "And Victoria's parents, the Ashworths, will be joining us as well." I knew the Ashworth name. Anyone who grew up near the affluent circles of New England knew the Ashworths. They weren't just wealthy. They were old money. The kind of family whose name was etched into university library buildings and hospital wings. "All right," I replied. "That sounds like a big step for Julian. I look forward to meeting them." "Well, that is precisely why I am calling." My mother cut in, her tone sharpening just a fraction. "Julian is incredibly anxious about this dinner. It is essentially a pre-wedding family merger. The Ashworths move in very, very particular circles, Joshua. They have certain expectations about the company they keep." I felt a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Get to the point, Mom." She exhaled a sharp, irritated breath, annoyed that I was making her spell it out. "Julian is worried. Your aunt is worried. Frankly, your father and I are worried. We feel that having someone at the dinner table who is still struggling to establish themselves might send the wrong message about our family's status. We need to project a unified front of success to secure Julian's standing, and honestly, to ensure there are no hiccups with his future inheritance and trust arrangements with their family." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Struggling to establish themselves. That was it. That was the polite, devastatingly cruel phrase she used to summarize my entire existence. "I see," I said. My voice sounded hollow even to me. "So, to be absolutely clear, you are uninviting your own son from Christmas because you think I'm too poor to sit next to Julian's in-laws." "Joshua, please don't be dramatic," she scolded, entirely unfazed by the pain she was inflicting. "You always do this. You twist things. We are not uninviting you from the family. We are just asking you to be considerate of Julian's future. You have to understand how this looks. We will do something special, just you and me. Maybe after the new year, we can grab a quick lunch at that little sandwich shop you like near your apartment." She was talking about a Michelin-starred restaurant where I had recently hosted a massive corporate dinner to celebrate our Series C funding. But she didn't know that. She had never bothered to ask. "Understood," I said quietly. "Oh, thank goodness," she sighed, sounding genuinely relieved that I wasn't going to put up a fight. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. You always were the easy one to manage. Have a good week, Joshua. The line went dead. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone against the glass window. I just stood there in the absolute silence of my office, struggling to establish myself. I walked over to my laptop and tapped the spacebar to wake the screen. Staring back at me were the finalized documents for Novice Analytics. We had just closed our Series D funding round back in October. The company I built from the ground up with 2 friends was officially valued at $1.8 billion. My personal equity stake, exactly 31% of the company, made my current net worth approximately $558 million. I was a ghost, a phantom billionaire hiding in plain sight, wearing a $20 t-shirt from Target and driving a 10-year-old car, all to see if my family would love me for who I was, rather than what I could buy them. And now I had my answer. They didn't. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my contacts until I found Anthony, my lead public relations director. I hit dial. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, boss," Anthony said cheerfully. "What's the word?" "Anthony?" I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. "That Forbes 30 under 30 profile piece we shot last week. When exactly does it go live?" "The digital edition is scheduled to drop Christmas morning," Anthony replied, his tone shifting to business immediately. 6 a.m. Eastern Time sharp. The print edition hits the newsstands later that same day. "Why? Do you want me to push it back?" "We can probably delay it if you want to keep things quiet for the holidays." "No," I said, staring out at the Boston skyline. "I don't want to keep things quiet anymore. I want you to amplify it. Call every media contact we have. Send out press releases. I want that article to be the first thing every single person in the financial and tech sector sees when they wake up on Christmas morning." Anthony let out a low whistle. "All right, it's already going to be huge, Joshua. The secret tech billionaire angle is gold. But I'll make sure it's unescapable." "What's the occasion for the sudden media blitz?" I clenched my jaw. "Just making sure my family can find it. To truly understand why I made the decision to detonate my family's social standing on Christmas morning, you have to understand the 8 years of quiet, persistent humiliation that led up to that phone call. I wasn't born a rebel. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by manicured lawns, luxury cars, and suffocating expectations. My father, Charles, was a ruthless hedge fund manager. To him, the world was divided into 2 categories: winners and losers. Winners went into corporate law, high finance, or specialized medicine. Losers did everything else. When I graduated from MIT with a degree in computer science, Charles had my life mapped out. He had secured me an entry-level analyst position at a major investment bank in New York. The salary was massive, the hours were brutal, and the prestige was exactly what he wanted to brag about at the country club. I turned it down. I told him I was moving into a cramped, damp basement apartment in Cambridge with my 2 best friends from MIT, David and Nathan. I told him we were going to build an artificial intelligence platform focused on enterprise data security. I will never forget the look of absolute disgust on his face. "You're throwing your life away," Charles had sneered, standing in our massive foyer. "You think you're going to be the next Steve Jobs? You're going to end up a broke programmer fixing laptops. Don't come crawling back to me when you realize you need a real salary to survive." From that day forward, I was exiled. Not physically, but emotionally. I was the black sheep. David, Nathan, and I worked like dogs. We lived off cheap ramen noodles and instant coffee. We worked 20-hour days, writing thousands of lines of code, fighting through bugs, and pitching to tiny local businesses just to keep the lights on. It was grueling, terrifying, and the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. But whenever I had to go home for a family holiday, the reality of my family's contempt came crashing down on me. My older brother, Matthew, made sure I never forgot my place. Matthew was Charles's golden child. He was a high-powered corporate lawyer pulling in mid-six figures, and his entire personality was wrapped up in how much money he spent. I remember Thanksgiving, about 3 years into building Novice. I pulled up to the Greenwich estate in a used, dented Toyota Camry that I bought for $4,000. As I was walking up the driveway, Matthew pulled in right behind me in a brand new, screaming red Porsche 911. He parked, stepped out wearing a suit that cost more than my car, and tossed the heavy keys into the air, catching them with a smug grin. "Hey, little brother," Matthew called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Still driving that rust bucket? Man, I thought tech guys were supposed to be smart. Hard work pays off, Josh. Maybe if you beg for a promotion at whatever little IT help desk you're working at, you can upgrade to a Honda next year." My hands balled into fists inside my cheap jacket pockets. At that exact moment, Novice Analytics had just secured a breakthrough $8 million enterprise license with a Fortune 500 healthcare company. Our valuation was skyrocketing. I could have bought the dealership that sold him that Porsche in cash. But I didn't say a word. I just nodded and walked inside. I stayed silent because I was running a test. As my company grew from a basement startup to a multimillion-dollar firm, and eventually to a billion-dollar unicorn, I deliberately maintained my modest lifestyle. I kept the old car. I wore generic jeans and plain sweaters. I rented a normal, unassuming apartment. I desperately wanted to know if my family, my mother, my father, my own brother, could find it in their hearts to love Joshua, the person. Not Joshua, the CEO. Not Joshua, the bank account. I wanted them to show up for me when I appeared to have absolutely nothing to offer them in return. They failed. Spectacularly and repeatedly. The worst part wasn't the active insults like Matthew's. It was the passive erasure. It was how they completely deleted my existence from their narrative of success. 2 years ago, at my mother's extravagant 60th birthday dinner, the entire extended family was seated around a massive oak table. Everyone was taking turns giving updates. Matthew talked for 20 minutes about a massive corporate merger he had facilitated. My sister talked about her medical residency. I had just closed our Series B funding round. We had officially hit a $620 million valuation. I was so proud I thought my chest was going to burst. I thought, this is it. I'll tell them tonight. I'll share this with them. I leaned forward, trying to catch my father's eye. "Dad, Mom, I actually have some really exciting news about the business too. We just finalized." "Oh, Joshua, not right now," my mother interrupted, waving her hand at me dismissively without even turning her head to look at me. "Matthew was just about to tell us about the partner track at his firm. Go on, Matthew, sweetie. Don't let him interrupt you." I slowly leaned back in my chair. The air left my lungs. The silence in my head was deafening while the rest of the table eagerly leaned in to listen to Matthew brag about his lawyer fees. They never asked. In 8 years, not a single one of them ever asked for the name of my company. They never asked what my software did. They saw the cheap clothes and the old car, and they simply assumed I was a failure. They constructed an entire reality where I was an embarrassment, and they never once bothered to fact-check it. Every eye roll. Every heavy sigh from my father when I spoke. Every time my mother strategically cropped me out of family photos before posting them to her social media, so her wealthy friends wouldn't see the struggling son. I cataloged all of it. I was giving them the rope to hang themselves with. And that phone call from my mother, uninviting me to protect Julian's precious old money fiancé, was the moment they finally kicked the chair out from under their own feet. I was done waiting for them to love me. It was time to introduce them to the man they had been ignoring for nearly a decade. The fuse was officially lit 5 days after my mother's phone call. It was December 15th, and Chloe Morrison, the lead technology correspondent for Forbes magazine, arrived at the Novice Analytics headquarters for my profile interview. Chloe wasn't a lightweight. She was a seasoned journalist known for ripping apart tech executives and exposing vaporware. When she stepped off the elevator onto our top floor, I saw her eyes widen behind her glasses. Our office was no longer a damp basement. It was a sprawling, state-of-the-art facility taking up 4 floors of prime Boston real estate. We had over 340 employees. There were glass-walled collaborative spaces, servers humming quietly in climate-controlled rooms, and massive digital monitors tracking global threat data in real time. "You built all of this in 8 years?" Chloe asked, stopping in the middle of the main walkway, clearly trying to process the scale of the operation. My co-founders, David and Nathan, and I built this. I corrected her gently, gesturing for her to follow me toward my office. I just helped steer the ship. We sat down in my office, with the gray expanse of the harbor stretching out behind me. The interview was intense. For 2.5 hours, Chloe grilled me on the granular details of our machine learning algorithms, our client acquisition strategies, and the grueling early days of near bankruptcy. She was thorough, professional, and entirely focused on the business. And then, as she was reviewing her notes, the atmosphere in the room shifted. She tapped her pen against her chin and looked up at me, her journalistic instincts kicking in. "So, Joshua, let's talk about your background," Chloe said, flipping to a fresh page in her notebook. "My research team pulled your file. You grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Charles Morrison is your father. That is serious old guard Wall Street money. You come from a family deeply entrenched in traditional finance and law." I nodded slowly, leaning back in my leather chair. "That's correct. Starting a tech company from scratch is incredibly risky," she continued, her eyes fixed on me. "Especially an AI security firm when the market was barely formed. How much did your family's capital and connections help get Novice off the ground in those early days? Did your father seed your initial funding rounds?" The room went completely quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the heating vent above us. This was the crossroads. For 8 years, I had maintained the wall between my personal wealth and my family's ignorance. I could give her a standard, polished PR answer. I could say we wanted to do it independently. I could protect their reputation. I could let them continue living in their country club fantasy world. But then I remembered the tone of my mother's voice, struggling to establish themselves. I looked at Chloe. "They didn't give me a single cent, Chloe." She raised an eyebrow, poising her pen over the paper. "They didn't invest? Was there a conflict of interest with your father's firm?" "No," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, dead-level pitch. "There was no conflict. My family didn't invest because my family has absolutely no idea this company exists." Chloe froze. Her pen stopped mid-air. For a woman who interviewed billionaires for a living, she looked genuinely thrown off balance. "I'm sorry. I must have misheard you. Your family doesn't know you are the CTO and co-founder of a company recently valued at $1.8 billion. They think I work as a low-level IT support guy at a struggling startup," I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the desk. "They've never asked for the name of my company. They've never asked to visit my office. My brother drives a Porsche and tells me to work harder so I can afford a decent car. My father tells people I'm finding myself. They have collectively decided that I am the massive failure of the Morrison family." Chloe slowly lowered her pen. "They don't know your net worth is over $500 million? They think I buy my clothes on clearance," I replied. "Joshua," Chloe said, leaning in, her journalistic instincts entirely hijacked by the human drama unfolding in front of her. "Why? Why would you hide something this massive from your own blood?" "Because I wanted to know if they would love me if I wasn't successful," I answered, the raw honesty of the statement burning my throat. I wanted to know if I had inherent value to them outside of what I could achieve for the family name. And I got my answer. I paused, letting the silence stretch out before I delivered the final blow. 5 days ago," I continued, making sure she was looking right into my eyes, "my mother called me. She explicitly uninvited me from our family's Christmas Eve dinner. My cousin, Julian, is bringing his new fiancée, Victoria Ashworth, to meet the family. The Ashworths are old money. My mother told me that having someone there who is still struggling to establish themselves would embarrass the family and send the wrong message about our status." Chloe's jaw actually dropped. She stared at me, completely speechless for 3 full seconds before she scrambled to pick up her pen. "She uninvited you to Christmas because she thinks you're poor?" Chloe asked, her voice hushed with disbelief. "Yes," I said. "She told me I would reflect poorly on them." Chloe started writing furiously. She didn't look up as she spoke. Joshua, if I put this in the profile, this isn't just a business story anymore. This is going to be the centerpiece of the entire article. It is a complete and utter indictment of your family's character. Millions of people are going to read this. Your family is going to read this. I know, I said, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders with every word I spoke. I am tired of hiding my success to protect the fragile egos of people who never once tried to protect me. I built an empire. My technology secures the data of millions of people. I employ hundreds of brilliant minds. And I did it all while my own mother was too ashamed to put me in a family photograph. Chloe looked up from her notebook. There was a fierce glint of respect in her eyes. When do you want them to find out? The digital drop is Christmas morning at 6 a.m., right? I asked. Yes. Then let them wake up on Christmas morning and read exactly who they uninvited, I said. Print every single word. The days leading up to Christmas were a masterclass in psychological warfare, mostly against my own anxiety. Now that the match was struck, all I could do was wait for the powder keg to explode. I didn't hear a single word from my family. Not a text from Matthew asking if I was okay. Not a call from my father. Not a fake, apologetic message from my mother. The silence was absolute. To them, the Joshua problem had been neatly solved and swept under the rug, leaving their pristine holiday aesthetics untainted. But while they were busy preparing their Greenwich mansion for the Ashworths, I was preparing for war. On December 21st, I called my lead corporate lawyer, Sarah, into my office. Sarah, I need an ironclad documentation package, I told her, sliding a list of requirements across the desk. I want official, legally binding proof of my 31% equity stake in Novice Analytics. I want the most recent valuation documents from the Series D funding. I want everything on company letterhead, fully notarized and signed. Sarah looked over the list, her brow furrowing. This is highly unusual, Joshua. Are we facing a hostile takeover attempt? Is there an audit coming up that I don't know about? No, I said calmly. I'm just going to need to prove exactly who I am to some very stubborn people very soon. I need it ready by the 23rd. Consider it done, she said. On December 23rd, I left the office early and did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager living under my father's roof. I went high-end shopping. For nearly a decade, my uniform consisted of faded denim, plain hoodies, and scuffed sneakers. I used my appearance as a shield to deflect their greed. Now it was time to put on my armor. I walked into a luxury designer boutique on Newbury Street in Boston, the kind of place where they offer you champagne the moment you cross the threshold. I spent 2 hours working with a tailor. I bought a custom-fitted, midnight charcoal suit woven from Italian wool. The fabric felt like water over my skin. I bought a crisp white shirt, a subtle silk tie, and a pair of handmade leather Oxfords that cost more than my first month's rent in Cambridge. Finally, I bought a heavy, steel-faced luxury watch, the kind of timepiece my brother Matthew would drool over. When I stood in front of the three-way mirror in the boutique, I barely recognized myself. The slouching, defensive posture of the family failure was gone. The man staring back at me looked dangerous. He looked like exactly what he was. A self-made tech billionaire who didn't owe a single soul an apology. Christmas Eve finally arrived. While my family was undoubtedly sitting around their massive mahogany dining table, clinking crystal wine glasses with the Ashworth family and pretending they lived perfect, flawless lives, I was sitting alone in my apartment. It was quiet. I ordered a medium-rare steak from an incredible local restaurant, poured myself a glass of 20-year-old scotch, and sat by the window watching the snow begin to fall over the city streets. It was a strange feeling. I was entirely isolated, banned from the only family I had, yet I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The lie was almost over. The 8 years of biting my tongue, swallowing my pride, and hiding in the shadows was coming to an end. I went to bed at midnight. I set my phone alarm for 5:55 a.m. I barely slept. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing through 100 different scenarios of how they would react. Would they deny it? Would they apologize? Would they be angry? At 5:55 a.m., the harsh buzzing of my alarm shattered the silence of my dark bedroom. I sat up instantly. My heart was pounding a heavy, relentless rhythm against my ribs. The room was pitch black, illuminated only by the glaring blue light of my phone screen. I opened my web browser. I navigated to the Forbes homepage. At exactly 6 a.m., I refreshed the page. And there it was, taking up the entire front page of the digital edition. It was a stunning, high-definition photograph of me, standing in the novice analytics boardroom with the Boston skyline glittering through the glass behind me. I was wearing my usual simple clothes in the photo, but the headline above my head was anything but simple. In massive, bold font, it read, "The Secret Billionaire: How Joshua Morrison Built a $1.8 billion Tech Empire While His Family Thought He Was Failing." Below that, the subheadline dug the knife in deeper. Uninvited from Christmas for being too embarrassing. The 29-year-old CTO breaks his silence on toxic wealth, family betrayal, and building the future of AI security. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Chloe hadn't held back. She had crafted a masterpiece of a profile. It detailed our grueling startup phase, our massive government contracts, and our breathtaking valuation. And right there, in the third paragraph, was the brutal, unvarnished truth about my mother's phone call. She had quoted me verbatim. By 6:02 a.m., the silence in my apartment was shattered. My phone vibrated in my hand. Then it vibrated again, and again. Within 60 seconds, it became a continuous, chaotic buzz of incoming data. Ping, ping, ping. LinkedIn notifications flooded my screen. Hundreds of connection requests from industry leaders. My email inbox counter started spinning like a slot machine. Twitter notifications exploded. The hashtag Secret Billionaire was already gaining traction. Texts from my employees and college friends started pouring in. "Holy crap, Joshua, why didn't you tell us the family drama? You are an absolute legend." I ignored all of them. I was waiting for specific numbers to flash across my screen. At 7:14 a.m., the first one hit. It was Matthew. The text preview popped up on my lock screen. "What the actual hell is this, Joshua? Is this some kind of sick joke? Call me right now." 2 minutes later, my mother's number appeared. She didn't text. She called. The phone vibrated violently against my palm. I watched her name flash on the screen until it finally rolled over to voicemail. Immediately after, a text from her arrived. "Joshua Charles Morrison, you pick up this phone this exact second. What have you done to us?" Then my father called. Then Julian. By 8 a.m., I had 47 missed calls and over 100 frantic text messages from the 4 people who, just 12 hours prior, had been perfectly happy pretending I didn't exist. I didn't answer a single one. I turned the phone to silent, tossed it onto my kitchen counter, and started brewing a pot of coffee. The storm had broken. Now all I had to do was wait for the floodwaters to reach my door. They didn't even bother to knock politely. At exactly 11:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, the heavy wooden door of my apartment vibrated with a frantic, aggressive pounding. Bang, bang, bang. I took a slow sip of my coffee, set the mug down on the granite counter, and walked toward the door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. My entire family was clustered in the narrow hallway. My mother, Margaret, my father, Charles, my brother, Matthew, and my cousin, Julian. They looked completely unhinged. They were all still dressed in their expensive, tailored Christmas morning attire, cashmere sweaters and slacks. But their faces were pale, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute fury. They looked like they had just fled a burning building. Before I could say a word, they shoved past me into my living room, bringing the bitter chill of the winter air in with them. "Joshua!" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking in a pitch I had never heard before. She spun around, her eyes darting frantically around my modest, sparsely decorated apartment as if she expected to see stacks of $100 bills piled up in the corners. Explain this. Explain this right now. The Ashworths saw the article. Victoria's father forwarded the link to Charles during breakfast. What did you do to us? I closed the front door quietly. I leaned against it and crossed my arms. I gave an interview to Forbes, I said, my voice completely flat. I would have thought the headline made that pretty clear. Matthew stepped forward. His face flushed dark, mottled red with pure rage. The veins in his neck were standing out. He pointed a trembling finger violently at my chest. You lied to us, Matthew roared, his arrogant lawyer persona completely shattering. You sat at our dinner table for 8 years, acting like you were some broke, pathetic loser while you were sitting on $500 million. You humiliated your own family on a national stage. You made us look like monsters. I never lied, I fired back, pushing off the door. The calm I had maintained all morning vanished, replaced by a raw, burning intensity that had been building inside me since I was 21 years old. I told you I worked in tech. I told you I built security software. I told you the company was doing well. You just never cared enough to ask for a single detail. We are your family, my father bellowed, stepping up next to Matthew. Charles Morrison, the stoic titan of Wall Street, looked genuinely rattled. You painted us as elitist snobs in a major publication. You told the world we abandoned you. You did abandon me. I yelled back, my voice echoing off the hardwood floors, silencing him instantly. I walked right up to my father, refusing to break eye contact, forcing him to look at the son he had ignored. Do you remember my college graduation, Dad? When I told you about the startup. You told me I was wasting my education and throwing my life away. You told me not to come crying to you when I failed. I pivoted, turning my anger onto my mother, who shrank back slightly. Do you remember when I tried to introduce you to David and Nathan, my business partners? You told me, and I quote, "Keep your scruffy work friends out of my house." Every time I opened my mouth to talk about my life, you shut me down to listen to Matthew brag about his car or his lawyer fees. My mother put a trembling hand to her chest, tears suddenly welling up in her eyes, though whether they were tears of guilt or tears of public embarrassment, I couldn't tell. We gave you everything, Joshua, she cried, her voice trembling. We paid for your college. We gave you a beautiful home. We just wanted you to have a secure life. And you do this? You test us? You play this sick, twisted psychological game with your own blood. It wasn't a game, Mom. I snapped, my jaw tight. It was reality. I wanted to see if you loved me without a massive bank account attached to my name. I wanted to see if I had any value to you if I couldn't buy you status. And 2 weeks ago, you gave me my final, undeniable answer. I pointed directly at Julian, who flinched and stared down at his expensive leather shoes, refusing to look at me. You banned me from Christmas? I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet hiss. You told me I was struggling, and that I would embarrass the family in front of Julian's new in-laws. You excluded me because I wasn't rich enough for your aesthetic. That was a misunderstanding, my mother pleaded, taking a desperate step toward me, reaching out to grab my arm. We were just stressed about the merger of the families. We love you, Joshua. I stepped back sharply, out of her reach. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. I looked at all of them, taking in their panicked, desperate faces. The panic in your eyes right now? It isn't because you realize you hurt me. You aren't sorry for ignoring me for a decade. You are only sorry you got caught. You're sorry that the entire world now knows exactly how shallow and cruel the Morrison family really is. You're furious because you missed out on bragging rights at the country club. Matthew scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of control. Joshua, please, stop being so dramatic. Let's just sit down, call your PR guy, and figure out how to draft a retraction or a joint statement. Get out. The 2 words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. What? My father asked, stunned. I said, get out of my house. I yelled, my voice vibrating with a power I didn't know I possessed. I walked over to the front door and ripped it open, gesturing to the hallway. Go back to Greenwich. Go back to your perfect Christmas dinner with the Ashworths. Go worry about your status and your inheritance. Because none of you have absolutely any place in my life ever again. They stared at me in stunned, horrified silence. For their entire lives, they had looked at me and seen a quiet, submissive, easily manageable boy. They didn't recognize the ruthless, hardened man standing in front of them now. Slowly, without saying another word, my father's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. He turned and walked out the door. Matthew followed closely behind, his face a mask of bitter defeat. Julian gave me one last, incredibly guilty look, mouthing the word sorry, before trailing behind them. My mother was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. She looked at me, searching my eyes for any shred of the little boy she used to control. She found nothing but cold, blank resolve. She let out a quiet sob, turned around, and walked away. I pulled the door shut. The heavy click of the deadbolt locking felt like the final period at the end of a very long, very painful chapter. The apartment fell dead silent again. I stood there, breathing heavily, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from my veins. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I didn't spend the rest of that Christmas afternoon crying in my apartment. I didn't feel broken, and I didn't feel a shred of regret. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely and utterly weightless. The toxic gravity of my family's expectations had finally been severed. As evening approached, I showered and walked into my bedroom. Hanging on the closet door was the custom midnight charcoal suit I had bought on Newbury Street. I put it on. I tied the silk tie, adjusted the cuffs of the crisp white shirt, and strapped the heavy steel watch to my wrist. I looked in the mirror. I wasn't hiding anymore. I left my apartment and took a black car downtown to the Four Seasons Hotel. Every year, the tech industry elites hosted a massive, exclusive charity gala on Christmas evening. It was a haven for people who either didn't celebrate the holiday traditionally or, like me, didn't have a family to go home to. When I handed my wool overcoat to the attendant and walked into the grand ballroom, the physical reaction of the crowd was instantaneous. The room was packed with hundreds of venture capitalists, software developers, and startup founders. As I stepped onto the plush carpet, the ambient hum of chatter noticeably dropped. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes widened as people nudged their companions, pointing discreetly in my direction. I wasn't the invisible guy in the rusty Toyota Camry anymore. I was the man who had detonated a cultural bomb on the cover of Forbes that morning. Almost immediately, the crowd parted, and I was surrounded. Venture capitalists from Silicon Valley, who had completely ignored my cold emails 5 years ago, were now aggressively pushing through the crowd to shake my hand and hand me their premium business cards. Rival tech founders were patting me on the back, laughing and asking for advice on scaling enterprise software. The energy was electric, but the most pivotal moment of the night happened about an hour later, near the quiet edge of the open bar. I was sipping a glass of club soda when Margaret Chin walked up to me. If you are in the tech industry, you know Margaret Chin. She is a legendary CEO who built one of the largest, most dominant telecom networks in the country from absolutely nothing. She was wearing a stunning, simple black gown, her expression sharp and intensely evaluating. I read the Forbes article this morning over coffee, she said, her voice cutting clearly through the background jazz music. I turned to face her, giving a respectful nod. I imagine most people in this room did, ma'am. She offered a small, knowing smile, swirling the ice in her glass. It takes an incredible amount of guts to strip away the illusion of the perfect, wealthy family in a public forum like that. Most people in our tax bracket spend millions of dollars trying to hide their toxic family dynamics. You weaponized yours. It wasn't about revenge, I said honestly. It was just about the truth. I know, Margaret said, stepping slightly closer. My parents didn't speak to me for 3 solid years when I dropped out of law school to start my first company. They told all our relatives I was a disgrace. They cut me out of family photos. I looked at her, surprised. What changed? I made my first $100 million, Margaret said bluntly, her eyes hard. Suddenly, they remembered they had a daughter. Suddenly, they were so proud of my vision. But by the time they came crawling back, I had learned a very hard, very necessary truth about life and success. She reached out and lightly tapped her manicured finger against my lapel, looking me dead in the eyes. You cannot build an empire if you are carrying the dead weight of people who do not believe in you, she said firmly. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to your peace of mind, Joshua. You did the right thing today. Welcome to the club. Her words hit me like a physical force. It was the exact validation I didn't even realize I had been desperately seeking. My own mother had cast me out, but here, among the titans of the industry, I was being welcomed into a new kind of family. A family built on mutual respect and actual achievement. Meanwhile, while I was finding my footing and gaining respect among my peers, my biological family was experiencing a very different kind of Christmas evening back in Greenwich. Throughout the gala, my phone kept buzzing in my pocket with updates from Anthony, my PR director. The internet is a ruthless place, and social media had completely turned its teeth on the Morrison family. The public had latched onto the specific quote my mother used about me struggling to establish myself. Tech forums, business Twitter, and even mainstream news outlets were tearing my family apart. They were being held up as the ultimate, disgusting example of toxic old money elitism and shallow parental love. Anthony texted me screenshots. Matthew had been forced to lock all of his social media accounts, making them completely private. Thousands of people had found his arrogant posts posing with his Porsche and had flooded his law firm's public page with negative reviews, calling him a nepotism baby and a fraud. My father's hedge fund was dealing with frantic calls from investors who were questioning his judgment and character after reading how he treated his own son. And my mother, according to a frantic, angry text I received from my aunt later that night, had locked herself in the master bedroom of the Greenwich estate. She was refusing to come down for dinner and refusing to take calls from her elite country club friends, all of whom had seen the article and were whispering about the scandal. They had spent 8 long years meticulously trying to protect their pristine, wealthy image from the embarrassment of having me around. And in the span of just 12 hours, my honesty had burned that fake image straight to the ground. As the gala began to wind down around midnight, I stood by the massive glass windows of the Four Seasons, looking out at the snow-covered streets of Boston illuminated by the streetlights. I took a deep breath. The air in my lungs felt cleaner than it had in years. For the first time since I was a child, I didn't feel a crushing, desperate need to prove my worth to my father. I didn't feel the need to shrink myself to make my mother comfortable. I had survived the storm. I had lost my family, but I had finally found myself. And as I looked out over the city, I knew this was only the beginning of my story. The morning of December 26th felt entirely different from any day I had ever experienced. The intense, burning adrenaline of the Christmas Day confrontation had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. I woke up in my Cambridge apartment, poured a cup of black coffee, and looked at my phone. The media storm hadn't slowed down. If anything, it had mutated into something larger. The Wall Street Journal had picked up the story, running a feature on the psychology of wealth and family dynamics. My brother Matthew's career as a corporate lawyer was taking a massive public hit. The internet had zeroed in on his arrogance. People were dissecting my family's behavior as a textbook case of toxic elitism. But I wasn't focused on them anymore. I was focused on the future. At 10 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID simply read, "Unknown number." Normally, I would let it go to voicemail, but my PR director Anthony had warned me that high-level investors often used unlisted numbers. I swiped to answer. Joshua Morrison speaking, I said. Mr. Morrison. Good morning. This is Richard Ashworth. I froze. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. Richard Ashworth. The patriarch of the Ashworth family. The billionaire titan of industry whose approval my mother had sacrificed me to get. Mr. Ashworth, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level, though my heart rate immediately spiked. I didn't expect to hear from you. I imagine you didn't. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried the undeniable weight of a man who commanded entire boardrooms. I am calling because I owe you a direct apology, Joshua, and I prefer to handle my apologies man to man. You don't owe me an apology, sir, I said carefully. We've never met. No, but my family's name was used as a weapon against you, Richard said. There was a hard, sharp edge of anger in his tone, but it wasn't directed at me. I read the Forbes article yesterday morning over breakfast. Then I had my team verify the details. When I realized that your mother explicitly banned you from your own family Christmas dinner because she thought your perceived lack of wealth would offend my family, I was utterly disgusted. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening intently. Let me tell you something about the Ashworth money, Joshua, Richard continued. Yes, we are old money now, but my grandfather built our fortune from the ground up in the steel mills. He worked until his hands bled. He despised people who inherited their status and used it to look down on the working class. If he knew that our family name was used to exclude a self-made entrepreneur because he drove an old car and built his own wealth in silence, he would roll over in his grave. I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Ashworth. I don't just say things to be polite, Richard stated firmly. Actions matter. I want you to know that yesterday afternoon, after a very long conversation, my daughter Victoria drove to your aunt's house. She gave Julian his ring back. I gripped the edge of the granite counter. She broke off the engagement? She did, Richard confirmed. Victoria is a smart girl. She told Julian that any family who would brutally discard their own blood to maintain a fake social aesthetic is not a family she will ever marry into. She refuses to tie her future children to a bloodline that values a luxury car over human decency. Your cousin's behavior, and his complicity in your mother's cruelty, cost him his future with my daughter. My mind raced. My mother had orchestrated my exile specifically to secure Julian's engagement and guarantee his access to the Ashworth inheritance. Instead, her actions had single-handedly destroyed it. The irony was so sharp it almost physically hurt. I'm sorry for the pain this has caused Victoria, I said sincerely. Don't be, Richard replied instantly. You saved her from making the biggest mistake of her life. You exposed the rot in the foundation before she signed the contract. For that, the Ashworth family actually owes you a debt of gratitude. He paused for a brief moment, and when he spoke again, his tone shifted from a protective father to a ruthless businessman. Now, on to business, Richard said. I had my lead analysts look into novice analytics last night. Your machine learning architecture for enterprise data security is brilliant. It's exactly the kind of disruptive technology my holding company looks for. When you prepare for your Series E funding round, or if you push toward an IPO, I want my firm at the table. I want to invest in you, Joshua. I invest in character just as much as I invest in code. And you have both in spades. I will have my team send over the preliminary prospectus next month. I smiled. I look forward to it. Keep building your empire, son. Goodbye. The line clicked dead. I set the phone down on the counter. I let out a long, heavy breath. The people my mother worshipped, the people she threw me away for, had just rejected her entirely and offered me a seat at their table. 2 days later, on December 28th, the final piece of the fallout arrived. I was sitting in my office at Novice Analytics when my assistant brought in a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had been delivered by a private courier. I instantly recognized the heavy, embossed stationery. It was my father's. I sat alone at my mahogany desk. I used a silver letter opener to slice the top of the envelope and pulled out 3 pages of handwritten text. The handwriting was tight and precise, exactly like Charles Morrison himself. I spread the pages out on my desk and began to read. Joshua, I have spent the last 3 days sitting in my study, staring at the wall, trying to figure out how to write this. I have read the Forbes article 17 times. I have read every vicious comment, every brutal think piece, and every social media discussion about our family. I have watched my professional reputation take a hit, and I have watched your mother completely fall apart. My first instinct, ingrained in me by decades on Wall Street, was to fight back, to draft a PR statement defending ourselves, to call my lawyers, to twist the narrative and make you look like the villain. But I didn't, because the hardest part of the last 72 hours wasn't the public humiliation. The hardest part was realizing that every single word you said in that article was the absolute truth. We didn't mean to hurt you. We always told ourselves we were pushing you to be better. But those are just excuses. The ugly, undeniable truth is that we valued achievement over character. We valued appearance over substance. We valued what you could do for the Morrison family's public image rather than who you were as a human being. Your mother is devastated. Your brother Matthew is furious and lashing out at everyone because his ego cannot handle the public backlash. Your aunt is beside herself because Victoria called off the wedding, and Julian's guaranteed path to a massive inheritance vanished overnight. But their feelings do not matter right now. What matters is what I have to say to you. You were right. You built something extraordinary while we casually dismissed you. You proved your brilliance while we confidently predicted your failure. You sat at our dinner table, eating the scraps of our attention, while holding more power and wealth than all of us combined. And when your success finally became public, our very first thought wasn't pride. It was how we could benefit from it. I am deeply, profoundly ashamed of myself. As a father, my only job was to make sure you felt unconditionally loved and supported. I failed. I looked at my brilliant, independent son and I saw a disappointment, simply because you didn't wear the right suit or choose the right corporate ladder. I don't expect your forgiveness, Joshua. I don't expect reconciliation. You established a firm boundary on Christmas morning, and I respect it. I am writing this because you deserve to know that I finally see clearly what my arrogance blinded me to for 8 years. You didn't need us to succeed, but we desperately needed you to matter. I am so sorry we failed you. With profound regret, Dad. I read the letter 3 times. The silence in my office was absolute. It was the most honest, vulnerable thing Charles Morrison had ever said in his entire life. There was no manipulation in the ink. There was no demand for me to come back and fix their public image. It was a complete, unconditional surrender. I carefully folded the pages, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it inside the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to call him. The letter didn't magically erase a decade of emotional neglect. It didn't excuse the cruelty, but it did provide closure. The war was officially over. I had won not by destroying them, but by outgrowing them completely. 6 months later. The air in New York City was thick and humid, but inside the New York Stock Exchange, the climate control kept everything crisp and sharp. It was a Tuesday morning in June. I stood on the iconic trading floor, surrounded by a sea of monitors, ringing phones, and financial analysts in tailored suits. To my left stood David. To my right stood Nathan, my 2 best friends, my co-founders, the guys who had survived on instant noodles with me in a damp Cambridge basement 8 years ago. We were all wearing custom-tailored suits. The Novice Analytics logo flashed brightly across the massive digital banners wrapping around the room. Today was the day. Novice Analytics was going public. The energy on the floor was electric. The institutional investors had aggressively bought into our IPO during the roadshow. Richard Ashworth had made good on his promise, securing a massive block of shares for his holding company. When the opening bell finally rang, the sound echoed through my chest. The trading commenced. Within the first 2 hours, our stock price surged past our initial projections. By noon, the financial news networks were broadcasting our numbers worldwide. Novice Analytics was officially valued at $4.2 billion. My personal equity stake, after the dilution of the public offering, firmly locked my net worth at $1.3 billion. I was 30 years old, and I was officially a self-made billionaire. Our executive team celebrated in a private room overlooking the trading floor. Pop corks flew from vintage champagne bottles. We toasted to the late nights, the failed prototypes, the brutal stress, and the ultimate victory. But as I stood by the glass, looking down at the chaotic, beautiful machinery of the stock market, I noticed what was missing. Or rather, who was missing. My family wasn't there. I had sent them formal invitations through my lawyer 2 months prior. It wasn't an olive branch. It was simply a courtesy. But they didn't come. The truth was, they couldn't show their faces. The fallout from the Forbes article had permanently altered their social standing. My family had actually become a case study at Harvard Business School. The Morrison dynamic was taught in MBA psychology courses as a prime example of how toxic family structures can alienate highly productive members through exclusion and rigid class expectations. My mother had stopped attending her charity luncheons in Greenwich because she couldn't handle the whispers and the side eyes from the other women. Matthew's law firm had quietly passed him over for a major promotion because his public image was deemed too volatile and arrogant for their top-tier clients. The only person from my bloodline who had made any real effort to change was Julian. Julian had reached out to me in April, for months after the Christmas disaster and the loss of his engagement to Victoria Ashworth. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Boston. He looked entirely different. The slick, arrogant country club posture was gone. He looked tired but genuine. He didn't make excuses. He sat across from me and laid his cards on the table. "I was a coward, Joshua," Julian had said, staring into his black coffee. "I let your mother ban you from Christmas because I was terrified that if the Ashworths thought we weren't perfect, I would lose Victoria and access to their world. I traded my own cousin for a shot at a massive inheritance. And you lost both," I pointed out softly. "I lost both," he agreed, nodding slowly. "But Victoria doing that, her leaving me, it was the massive wake-up call I needed. I realized I didn't even know who I was without my family's money and their toxic obsession with status. I had no actual character. So what are you doing now?" I asked. "I cut off my trust fund," Julian said. It was the most shocking thing he could have possibly said. "I refused my father's money. I moved out of the luxury condo. I enrolled in a master's program at NYU. I'm studying social work." I raised an eyebrow. "Social work?" "Yeah," he smiled, a real unforced smile. "I want to help families that are actually struggling. Real struggles. Not the fake, manufactured country club drama we grew up with. I want to build something of my own, just like you did. I just wanted to look you in the eye and say thank you. You blowing up our family secrets was the best thing that ever happened to me." We shook hands that day. It wasn't an immediate fix, but it was the foundation of a real, honest relationship. Now, standing at the New York Stock Exchange, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from my mother. "I am watching the live coverage on CNBC. You look so handsome, Joshua. I am so incredibly proud of the man you have become. I am so sorry we are not there to celebrate with you. I love you." I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. The anger was gone. The desperation to be loved by her was gone. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. I typed my reply slowly, making sure every word was exactly what I meant. "Thank you for the congratulations. I love you too, Mom. But love is not enough anymore. It has to be accompanied by respect, curiosity, and belief in who I am, not what I am worth. When you are finally ready to offer those things without conditions, we can sit down and talk." I hit send. I slid the phone back into my pocket and turned around to face the room. David was holding up a glass of champagne, grinning from ear to ear. Nathan was laughing at something Anthony, the PR director, had said. These were my people. This was the family I had chosen. The people who showed up for me when I had absolutely nothing to offer them but a crazy dream and an old Toyota Camry. When we flew back to Boston that night, I walked into the lobby of Novice Analytics. Hanging on the pristine white marble wall, right behind the reception desk, was a massive, framed print of the Forbes magazine cover. It wasn't hanging there as a trophy of revenge. It wasn't there to spite my father or humiliate my mother. It was hanging there as a permanent reminder. A reminder that the people who dismiss you when you are struggling in the dark are rarely the people you want standing next to you when you finally step into the light. It is a reminder that true wealth isn't about the car you drive, the clothes you wear, or the inheritance you secure. True wealth is the character you build when absolutely no one is watching. I had built an empire, but more importantly, I had built a life I was proud of. And I had done it entirely on my own terms. Here is the truth I want to leave you with today. We are often taught that family is an unbreakable bond, that we must endure disrespect, belittlement, and toxic behavior simply because we share the same bloodline. But that is a dangerous lie. Respect is the absolute baseline for any relationship, and you should never have to shrink yourself, hide your success, or mask your true identity just to make insecure people feel comfortable. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the table where your value is constantly being questioned. Build your life in silence. Focus on your goals. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your character, not just your status or your salary. The right people will love you when your hands are empty, and they will cheer the loudest when your hands are full. If the story resonated with you, if you've ever had to set a hard boundary to protect your own peace, I want to hear from you. Tell me your favorite lesson from this story in the comments below, or simply drop the word good, so I know that this message hit home for you. Your interaction tells me that these stories matter, and it gives me the drive to keep sharing the real, raw truths of life. Thank you for being here with me. Until next time, keep building.